There is a quiet revolution that begins not with a march, not with applause, not with a dramatic transformation on the outside. It begins with a whisper inside your own mind, the moment you stop speaking to yourself like an enemy and begin to speak to yourself like someone worth loving. You see, the voice in your head is not just commentary, it is creation. Every thought you send inwardly is a seed. And every seed you plant in the soil of your soul will eventually bear fruit in your outer experience. So, what happens when you've spent your entire life planting shame, guilt, fear, unworthiness, and self-rejection? You grow a life where your internal suffering gets reflected in every relationship, every opportunity, and every moment you live. Not because you are broken, but because you never learned that love begins with how you speak to yourself. When you tell a child over and over that they are not good enough, they will eventually stop trying to prove you wrong and start believing you're right. And when you tell yourself over and over that you are not beautiful, not valuable, not capable of healing, not deserving of happiness, your soul will begin to dim itself to match your words. This is not because the soul loses power. The soul never weakens, but it will wait. It will wait patiently for your permission to rise again. You do not need to wait until someone outside of you sees your worth before you begin to see it for yourself. That is not how awakening works. That is not how love works. That is not how God works. You are not a project for others to validate. You are a masterpiece waiting to be unveiled. And that unveiling begins when you speak to yourself with the reverence you deserve. What if your inner dialogue became your sanctuary? What if you decided just for today that every time you opened your mouth to speak to yourself, it would be in the tone you would use with someone you deeply cherished? What if the voice in your head wasn't a critic, but a guardian, a lover, a soul friend? Do you not realize that every single cell in your body listens to what you say about it? When you say, "I'm so tired of myself," your cells hear that. When you say, "I can't believe I'm still like this," your heart contracts. When you shame your emotions, your nervous system tightens. And when you look in the mirror and repeat the same cruel thoughts you were conditioned to believe, you train yourself to reject the divine creation you truly are. But there is a turning point, a sacred pivot, a holy reversal. And it begins not with a new external achievement, not with someone else's praise, not with a sudden miracle falling into your lap. It begins with a choice to change the way you speak to the one who has been with you since the beginning, your own precious self. You've been asking for healing, but healing cannot come to a home where the owner is always throwing stones at the walls. You cannot ask for wholeness while declaring your own inner world unworthy. Healing begins the moment you stop waging war against your humanity and start holding your inner world like sacred ground. Yes, you've made mistakes. Yes, there were things you said and did and believed that did not reflect your highest self. But those things are not you. They are chapters. They are clouds passing through the sky of your being. They are not the sky. They are not your eternal essence. They are not your truth. Speak to yourself like someone who is becoming, not someone who is failing. Speak to yourself like someone who is healing, not someone who is broken. Speak to yourself like someone God would look upon and smile, because that is exactly what's happening. You see, the ego will always want to keep score. It will remind you of every failure, every time you fell short, every standard you didn't meet, every time you disappointed someone. But the soul doesn't count like that. The soul doesn't keep records of wrongs. The soul is not transactional. The soul is not a performance-based system. The soul only knows love. And love speaks differently. Love doesn't shame. Love doesn't compare. Love doesn't say, "You should be further along." Love says, "I see you trying. I see you surviving. I see your silent courage." And love doesn't scream. Love whispers. which is why your inner noise must be quieted, because you cannot hear love's whisper over the roar of your inner critic. Speak to yourself like someone worth loving, because love is not just something you give, it is something you are. And when you forget that, you begin to live as though love is somewhere out there beyond you, waiting for you to earn it. But love is not a reward. It is your origin. It is your essence. It is your birthright. And your words, your inner words, are the gatekeepers to remembering that. There is something miraculous that happens when you stop talking to yourself like a victim of your past and start talking to yourself like the artist of your now. Suddenly, you don't need others to see your worth to feel it. Suddenly, you stop begging for validation and start radiating it. Suddenly, you realize that no one ever had the power to define you. They only had the power to distract you from defining yourself. And if you are still speaking to yourself through the voice of someone else's wound, an old parent, a harsh teacher, a former partner, then it is time to reclaim the microphone in your mind. You do not need to repeat the scripts you inherited. You are not required to carry on the legacy of internal war. You have permission to begin again. Pause, breathe, and say to yourself, I am not the opinion someone had of me. I am not the pain I internalized. I am not the shame I absorbed. I am a soul in progress. I am a being of light. I am allowed to evolve. Can you feel the shift? That quiet permission is not weakness. It is the birthplace of transformation. And when you speak to yourself as someone worth loving, the universe listens. Because the universe responds not to your words alone, but to the energy they carry. And there is no energy more attractive, more healing, more magnetic than the frequency of self-love expressed without ego, just pure presence, grace, and reverence. You were never meant to be your own jailer. You were meant to be your own liberator. And liberation begins with language, not external language, inner language. The voice you use when you're alone, the tone of your silence, the soundtrack of your self-perception. Would you dare to make that soundtrack a love song? Would you dare to look at yourself in the mirror, not to judge, not to fix, not to critique, but just to witness and bless? Because you don't need to be perfect to be worthy of love. You need only to be present. You are not here to criticize your way into growth. You are not here to punish yourself into peace. And you are certainly not here to bully your heart into awakening. That path leads only to more illusion, more separation, more silent suffering. The soul doesn't respond to harshness. The soul responds to kindness, not the fleeting kind we show others to appear gentle, but the unwavering kind we offer ourselves when no one is watching. There is an alchemy that takes place when gentleness becomes your inner default. Not weakness, but the strength of tenderness. The power of speaking life into your own spirit when it's tempted to collapse under the weight of invisible expectations. To walk yourself out of your own shadows and say, even here, I am learning. Even this moment is holy. Even now, I choose compassion. And no, it doesn't always feel natural, especially not when your habits of thought have been rehearsing self-rejection for decades. But every time you catch yourself slipping into old patterns, every time you interrupt the cascade of judgment with a pause, with a breath, with a blessing, you rewrite the very frequency of your life. One inner sentence at a time. The most powerful affirmations are not the loud declarations you post on walls. They're the quiet phrases you whisper in moments of despair. They're the words you repeat when you feel like giving up. They are the sentences that cradle your own ache when you don't feel lovable. They are the mantras that say, I may not understand this pain yet, but I still choose to stay with myself. Stay. Stay with yourself. Because self-abandonment is the oldest wound. We have learned to leave ourselves at the first sign of discomfort. We've learned to escape our own feelings, to betray our needs, to become masterful at pretending because we were taught somewhere that our realness made us less lovable, but that teaching was false. And healing is remembering the truth that your wholeness was never conditional. You do not become lovable through perfection. You become aware of your lovability by releasing the illusion that it was ever in question. And so we return to the sacred truth that the way you speak to yourself is not simply inner dialogue. It is the climate in which your soul either shrivels or expands. It is the light or the poison. It is the temple or the torment. And you, dear soul, are the architect of that temple. So when your thoughts begin to spiral, when the voice in your mind turns sharp and cold, ask yourself gently, would I speak this way to a wounded child? Would I say this to someone trembling with grief? Would I say this to someone I love? And if the answer is no, then pause, breathe, and speak again with love. Because every harsh thought is an opportunity to remember who you truly are. Every internal criticism is a doorway to self-reclamation. Every moment of unconsciousness is an invitation to return. Return to love. Return to truth. Return to the whisper of God that lives not in thunder, but in stillness. Not in shame, but in surrender. Not in punishment, but in presence. You see, your inner voice is the place where divinity meets humanity. It is the field where the eternal and the temporal touch. And if you want to live a life that is aligned with peace, with purpose, with your highest self, then that alignment must begin not outside, but within the folds of your most intimate thoughts. Because no amount of external love can make up for internal absence. No amount of applause can fill the void created by your own neglect. No relationship, no possession, no title, no victory can replace the simple, sacred act of being kind to yourself in the silence. You are not your wounds. You are not your past. You are not the outdated conclusions you drew when you were hurting and too young to understand. You are a divine being having a human experience, not the other way around. And your humanity is not something to fix, it is something to love. When you make peace with that, you stop striving to prove yourself and begin the far more powerful journey of being yourself. And what a miracle that is, to be your own sanctuary, to become the friend you always sought in others, to become the mother, the father, the lover, the healer, the presence for yourself. This is the great spiritual assignment. Not to reach for some faraway enlightenment, but to anchor light where you are, right now, in the form of your own words, your own breath, your own tenderness. It is the highest form of responsibility and the highest form of liberation. Because when you speak to yourself like someone worth loving, you don't just change your life, you change the lives of everyone around you. You become a mirror for healing, a lighthouse for those still lost in their own inner storm. You stop transmitting pain and start radiating peace. And suddenly, your existence becomes not a cry for attention, but a song of grace, a melody of wholeness, a quiet revolution that begins again with a whisper. So let today be the day you interrupt the spell, the hypnotic trance of unworthiness that's been rehearsed in your thoughts for far too long. Let today be the day you catch the voice that says, you're too much, or you're not enough. And respond not with more fear, but with forgiveness. Let it be the day you stop asking your wounds for permission to love yourself, because your wounds are not the authority your soul is. And the soul has never questioned your worth. Speak to yourself as if your words shape the universe, because in truth they do. Every vibration you send inward is echoed outward. Life bends to meet the frequency you hold within. If you treat yourself with disdain, you attract mirrors of that disdain. If you speak in love, you awaken love in every room you walk into. Not because you're trying to control outcomes, but because you're finally aligned with your source. There is no virtue in humility that erases your brilliance. There is no wisdom in modesty that silences your light. True humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself truthfully, without exaggeration or diminishment. And the truth is, you are already radiant, even if your eyes have yet to adjust to the light. You are not here to prove anything. You are here to remember everything, to remember your wholeness, to remember your sacredness, to remember that nothing you've been through has ever diminished your value, it has only dimmed your vision. But even the dimmest eye, when turned inward with love, can behold the divine. And when you do that, when you sit with yourself without an agenda, without judgment, without fixing, you begin to hear something underneath the noise, a softness, a presence, a voice that does not scream for attention, but calmly invites you back home. It says, I've never left you. It says, even when you forgot me, I was still here. It says, love yourself not because you've earned it, but because you exist. And that is the greatest miracle of all, to love yourself, not as a transaction, but as a remembrance. Not as a reward, but as a return. Not because you've become someone else, but because you've remembered who you are. This is not a one-time event. It is a practice, a spiritual devotion. And like all devotions, it requires consistency, not perfection. There will be days where the old voices return. Days where you forget your light. Days where you relapse into shame. But on those days, speak even more gently. Meet your backsliding with more grace. For it is not the falling that undoes us, it is the cruelty we offer ourselves when we fall. Speak with the voice of a shepherd, not a warden. Speak with the love of a mother to her child, not a judge to a defendant. Speak with the knowing that your words are not passive, they are permission slips for the soul to bloom. And bloom you must, because the world is not healed by people who hate themselves into silence. The world is healed by those who dare to love themselves into expression, those who dare to show up fully, those who, despite their scars, choose to speak with tenderness, those who treat their own presence as sacred, and in doing so, give others permission to do the same. You cannot give what you do not possess. If you want to give love, give it first to yourself. If you want to forgive others, begin by forgiving the voice in you that forgot how to be kind. If you want to be light for others, clean the lens through which your own light shines, and that lens is language. Speak to yourself like someone who is not done becoming. Speak to yourself like someone who still believes in their own healing. Speak to yourself like someone who is loved by God, because you are, always have been, and always will be. And when you do, you become a field of grace in a world that so often forgets. You become a reminder that tenderness is strength, that compassion is power. That silence can be holy when it is filled with self-respect, not self-hate. You become not someone who acts like love, but someone who is love, radiant, rooted, real. And when others encounter you, when they hear the way you speak, feel the way you walk, sense the peace in your presence, they may not know exactly what changed in you, but they'll feel it. They'll feel safer. They'll feel more open. They'll feel, perhaps for the first time in a long time, that they are allowed to love themselves too. And in that ripple, healing begins. Not because you preached, not because you tried to convince, but because you embodied what you once only hoped for. And the voice you now use, the one that once berated and bruised, has become the voice of healing. That is your legacy. And we are now nearing the closing threshold of this sacred message, this whispered return to truth. There is something profoundly holy about learning to hold space for yourself, not as a project, not as a burden, not as a list of improvements waiting to be made, but as a living, breathing miracle. You are not here to measure up. You are here to wake up. And waking up isn't a race toward perfection. It is the soft unveiling of what has always been divine underneath the noise. When you begin to truly speak to yourself like someone worth loving, your entire relationship with life changes. You no longer treat time as an enemy. You no longer chase after moments hoping they'll make you feel whole. You no longer bow to the pressure of being someone you are, not just to earn temporary approval. Instead, you become quiet, rooted, steady. You begin to walk through this world like a soul that remembers its source. And when your mind wants to panic, when the old wounds rise, when the fear tries to dress itself in logic, you return to the inner sanctuary you've been building. You return to the voice that doesn't panic, the one that doesn't shame, the one that says, we've been here before, and still you rise. You speak peace into chaos. You speak comfort into uncertainty. You speak grace into guilt. And slowly, what once triggered you becomes your invitation. What once scared you becomes your initiation. And what once separated you from yourself becomes the very doorway back to presence. No one else can do this work for you. You can read every book, attend every seminar, follow every teacher, and still, if your inner voice is cruel, the world will feel unkind. Not because the world is against you, but because your perception is filtered through your own unresolved self-judgment. So choose to be your own revolution. Let your mind be the garden of your highest devotion. Let every thought be filtered through the lens of love. Not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because you are spirit remembering what it feels like to come home. You don't need to correct every mistake to be worthy of compassion. You don't need to fix every flaw before you grant yourself gentleness. You don't need to reach some imagined peak of enlightenment to finally allow yourself rest. All you need is the willingness to be present with yourself as you are and speak the words you most need to hear. Try this. I forgive myself for forgetting who I am. I honor myself for surviving what I did not deserve. I release the need to criticize what is still healing. I speak love into every broken piece, not to fix it, but to remind it that it was never truly broken. This is the frequency of self-reunion. This is what it means to reclaim your voice, to not just think differently, but to feel differently. To not just change your narrative, but to soften into the sacredness of being. And when you make that shift from aggression to affection, from resistance to reverence, you begin to see it ripple outward. Not just in how you speak to yourself, but in how you speak to your past, to your future, to others, to the very mystery of life itself. You stop begging life to be gentle with you and instead become the source of that gentleness. You stop chasing peace like a possession and realize it's been inside your voice all along. You stop searching for someone to save you and begin the holy work of meeting yourself exactly where you are. That is the foundation. That is the breakthrough. That is the sacred silence that speaks louder than any performance. And now, with this grounded tenderness, we are ready to enter the final movement, the last unfolding breath of this journey. So here you are, not at the beginning of a new performance, but at the end of pretending, not at the edge of becoming someone else, but at the soft arrival into who you've always been beneath the noise. The voice you once used as a weapon has been returned to its true purpose: healing, blessing, creating, restoring. And as this truth begins to settle into the deeper layers of your being, you start to remember that your voice has never been just yours. It has always been a channel, a transmitter, a vessel for the divine to speak into form. And when you speak to yourself like someone worth loving, you are not just changing the course of your own life. You are participating in the healing of the entire collective. Because every time you interrupt shame with compassion, every time you replace judgment with grace, every time you choose presence over punishment, you are releasing a frequency into the world that uplifts all of us. You are making love louder than fear. You are becoming the antidote to a culture of self-rejection. You are saying to the universe, through your very breath, I am ready to be at peace with myself. I am ready to walk with dignity. I am ready to live like someone who remembers their divinity. And in that remembering, you start to forgive more easily. You stop taking things so personally. You stop chasing validation. You stop needing to be understood by everyone because you are finally understood by yourself. You look in the mirror and no longer search for what's wrong, you see what's sacred. You catch your own eye and smile, not because life is perfect, but because you no longer need it to be. You rest. You soften. You stop rushing. You make space for the kind of joy that doesn't need to be loud to be real. And most of all, you trust. You trust that the voice of love will guide you home again and again if only you're willing to listen. Because that voice isn't far away. It isn't hidden. It's not in some distant mountaintop retreat. It's not behind 1,000 steps of self-improvement. It is here, now, within, a whisper, waiting to become your song. So speak it. Say the words your heart has been aching to hear. I am safe with myself. I am no longer a threat to my own spirit. I am no longer a stranger to my own soul. I am worthy of gentleness, even when I fall. I am no longer at war with myself. And let every thought that follows be drenched in this energy. Let it bleed into your choices. Let it reshape your relationships. Let it slow your pace. Let it soften your gaze. Let it become your new default, not a performance, but a presence. You are not here to fight yourself. You are here to forgive yourself into freedom. You are not here to critique your reflection. You are here to revere it. You are not here to beg for worthiness. You are here to remember you are worthiness embodied. And that memory, that soul deep recognition is the revolution. So speak, beloved. Speak to yourself like someone worth loving. Because you are. You always were. And you always will be. In a world that never stops moving, stillness becomes the rarest form of wisdom. We are taught to chase, to climb, to hustle, to conquer. But the soul, your eternal essence, is not impressed by noise. It doesn't race. It doesn't strive. It doesn't scream. It whispers. And in the hush between your thoughts, in the quiet after the questions, that's where the soul begins to speak. Clarity is not something you achieve. It's something you remember. You were born with it, wrapped in simplicity, bathed in presence, untouched by confusion. But as the world's volume turned up, as expectations piled upon you, like bricks on the chest of your spirit, the clarity was buried beneath it all. Not lost, just waiting. Waiting for you to be still enough to feel it again. Stillness is not the absence of movement. It is the presence of awareness. It is the moment when you are no longer doing life, but being life. And in that being, the fog lifts. You begin to see, not with the eyes, but with the heart. Not with logic, but with knowing. The kind of knowing that doesn't require proof because it is truth. Most people confuse clarity with answers. They think they'll feel clear once they figure it all out, once the past is explained, the future guaranteed, the pain justified. But clarity is not born in solving. It is born in surrender. When you stop clenching the steering wheel of your life so tightly, when you stop demanding certainty from an uncertain world, something miraculous happens, peace walks in. And where peace goes, clarity follows. Let us remember the truth known by sages and saints. You are not here to figure life out. You are here to feel it, to open to it, to soften into it like water returning to the sea. The need for control is the ego's obsession, but the soul has no such hunger. It doesn't need to control. It already belongs. It doesn't need to prove it already is. It doesn't need to race. It already rests. Your inner chaos is not because life is chaotic. It's because you've been avoiding the sacred space within you, the silence. You've been filling every crack in your day with noise, distraction, validation. But clarity doesn't rise through effort. It rises through stillness. It doesn't come from pushing. It comes from pausing. And in that pause, you meet yourself again. You were never meant to carry the world on your shoulders. The world is not yours to control, it's yours to experience, to love, to witness, and to let pass through you like wind through an open field. When you sit in stillness, you remember this. You remember that life is not a storm to be survived, but a breeze to be felt. And in feeling it fully, you return to the truth that you were never disconnected, just distracted. Distraction is the greatest thief of clarity, not because it takes something from you, but because it turns your gaze away from what was always there. Like the sun hidden behind clouds, your light never left. It was only obscured by thought, fear, busyness. And when you finally get still, the clouds part, not all at once, but gently, respectfully, like a curtain rising to reveal your own divinity waiting patiently behind the veil. The stillness does not shout, it does not force, it invites, and it waits, always waits for you to accept. Not when the to-do list is done, not when the circumstances are perfect, but now in the breath you are taking. Now in the space between your thoughts. Now in the sacred pause where the mind rests and the soul wakes. And in this waking, something changes. You stop asking life to be different. You stop begging the moment to become something else. You begin instead to listen. To listen not with your ears, but with your entire being. You begin to hear the language of the soul, the language of stillness, and it tells you what no amount of striving could ever reveal. That you are safe, that you are loved, that you are already whole. Stillness is not a task. It is a homecoming, a return, a remembrance of who you were before the world told you who you should be. It is the falling away of every label, every mask, every identity constructed from fear. And as it all falls, what remains is essence. What remains is God not outside you, but in you. As you, moving through you, breathing you, being you. And in this sacred space, clarity is no longer something you seek. It becomes what you are. Let the world keep spinning. Let the chaos outside dance its wild, unpredictable dance. You don't need to control the storm. You only need to find the eye of it, the center. And that center is always still, that center is always you. So sit, breathe, be, and in that stillness, let the illusions dissolve. Let the old stories, the ones that said you're not enough, not worthy, not capable, let them fall like leaves in autumn, no longer needed for the soul's blooming. You are not your past. You are not your fear. You are not the noise of the world. You are the silence beneath it. You are the space between the notes, the rhythm that gives the music its meaning. You see now why clarity cannot be forced? Why it resists the grasping of the mind and instead flows through the openness of the heart? Because clarity is not information, it is transformation. It does not fill you, it empties you. And in that emptiness, you finally feel light enough to rise. You become like a feather surrendered to the wind, not passive, not powerless, but free. Free from the illusion that you need to have it all figured out. Free from the belief that healing requires effort. Free from the ego's insistence that you must earn peace. You don't earn peace, you return to it. You don't achieve clarity, you allow it. And all of it begins in stillness. So if you are weary, sit. If you are confused, sit. If you are broken, grieving, lost, overwhelmed, sit. Not to escape, not to avoid, but to arrive. Stillness is the most radical arrival. It is where you meet life without agenda, where you stop trying to be anything and remember you are already everything. In stillness, the soul speaks, and it speaks in a language beyond words, a language made of feeling, of knowing, of being. And what it whispers is this: you are already home. What if the very thing you've been searching for has been searching for you too, not in the noise, not in the chase, but in the quiet you keep avoiding? What if stillness is not just a spiritual practice, but a doorway, a sacred threshold where the divine and the human meet, where the veil thins and truth is no longer something you read about, but something you feel vibrating through the marrow of your being. There's a reason the great mystics sat in silence. There's a reason the prophets wandered the desert. There's a reason the sages withdrew from the noise of cities and climbed mountains to find God. It's not because the divine is far. It's because the world is loud, too loud to hear the subtle beauty of the eternal that whispers from within, too loud to feel the sacred pulse of presence moving in every breath, too loud to hear the soul say, I'm still here. I never left. You just forgot how to listen. You don't need a new path. You need a deeper presence. You don't need to run forward. You need to fall inward, into the holy quiet where your spirit waits patiently behind the storm of your thoughts, into the inner sanctuary where truth does not arrive dressed in certainty, but in peace. And that peace, that gentle presence, is the language of clarity. It does not bark orders or deliver perfect blueprints. It simply clears the debris so the light can shine again. And you have always been that light. The confusion, the anxiety, the overthinking, those are just clouds. And clouds, no matter how dark, can never extinguish the sun. The sun just waits. Still, constant, glowing behind the storm, your soul is that sun. Not in need of fixing, just waiting to be seen again. The world has conditioned you to think answers are earned by effort. That truth is something you must chase, something out there just beyond your reach. But the spiritual life is not about chasing anything. It is about remembering what is already within. It is the sacred reversal, the path not of gaining, but of shedding, of unlearning the noise. So you can return to the knowing. And it takes courage to be still. It takes courage to stop distracting yourself with the next thing, the next goal, the next identity. Because when you finally sit in silence, you meet yourself, not the self you show the world, not the self you've polished and performed, but the raw, trembling, holy self that has been whispering beneath the surface all along. Stillness is not easy. It confronts, it reveals, it humbles, it strips away everything that is false. It forces you to see the parts of yourself you've buried beneath achievement and validation. But it is in this seeing, this honest, sacred witnessing that you begin to return home. And that homecoming is clarity. Not the clarity that gives you all the answers, but the clarity that says, you don't need them, you already are the answer. There's a kind of wisdom that lives in the quiet. It cannot be found in books or sermons or lectures. It is not taught, it is remembered. It is the wisdom of the trees that do not try to grow, but grow. The rivers that do not try to flow, but flow. The stars that do not try to shine, but shine. What makes them divine is not effort, but essence. And what makes you divine is not your doing, but your being. You are the tree, you are the river, you are the star, and you are never more aligned with the truth of life than when you are still enough to simply be. Sit with that. Let it break open the armor of your striving. Let it dissolve the illusion that your worth is somewhere ahead of you. Let it remind you that clarity is not the reward for working harder, but the revelation that comes when you finally stop. And the moment you stop, truly stop, you start to see, you see that your worth has never been in your productivity, that your value has never been in your accomplishments, that your purpose is not something you chase, but something you remember. And what you remember in the stillness is this: you are already whole. You are already held. You are already here. And here is where everything begins. When the mind gets quiet, the heart begins to speak. And it speaks in a different language, a softer one. It doesn't argue or compare or worry. It doesn't say when or if or someday. It says now. It says yes. It says I am. And this I am is the most powerful prayer you will ever whisper. It is not a begging of life to become something else. It is a full-bodied return to what already is. It is the dissolving of ego into essence. It is the surrender of resistance into rest. It is the moment you stop pushing the river and let yourself be carried. So sit. Sit like the mountain sits. Sit like the moon watches. Sit like the ocean waits. Not to escape life, but to merge with it. To merge with the still, unshaken, eternal pulse that has always been inside you. Clarity does not always come in lightning bolts. Sometimes it arrives like dew, soft, slow, and silent, but it nourishes, it renews, it awakens the parts of you that were never dead, just dormant. And in that awakening, you come alive, not as someone else, but as more fully yourself. There is no rush. There is only rhythm, the rhythm of breath, the rhythm of being, the rhythm of love that has no opposite because it was never conditional. The stillness teaches this. It shows you that underneath all you're trying is a truth that never needed to be earned. You are the clarity. You are the peace. You are the stillness. And when you stop long enough to feel that, not just understand it, but truly feel it, you begin to live, not from fear, but from presence. Not from need, but from fullness. Not from ego, but from soul. And the soul, the soul does not rush. The soul knows. The soul flows. The soul rests in the silence because it remembers what the mind forgets, that God is not somewhere else. God is here, in the stillness, in the breath, in the now. There's something sacred about silence that terrifies the ego. The ego feeds on noise, on proving, achieving, calculating, defending. But the soul is nourished by stillness. The soul doesn't compete. It doesn't grasp or argue, it simply is. It breathes with the universe. It aligns with the eternal. It remembers. And the more you allow yourself to be still, the more you realize how loud your life had become. Not just in volume, but in expectation. Every moment stacked with demands, every thought laced with pressure, every breath taken like it had to accomplish something. But stillness says otherwise. Stillness says, come as you are, let go of the armor, lay down the need to be more than you are in this moment. It's enough. You're enough. You see, clarity doesn't need you to be perfect. It only needs you to be present. Present enough to witness what's been underneath all along. Not the story of who you think you are, but the truth of what you've always been, the presence behind the personality, the awareness behind the thoughts, the light behind the identity. When you return to stillness, you return to yourself. Not the self shaped by fear or comparison or past wounds, but the self with a capital S, the infinite spark that existed before the world had a name for you. And that spark doesn't flicker, it burns steady. Even when the mind is in chaos, the soul remains calm. Even when life is uncertain, the spirit stays whole. But we forget. We get caught in the swirl. We mistake the turbulence of our thoughts for the truth of our being. And in that forgetting, we suffer. We chase things that cannot fill us. We climb ladders that lead nowhere. We try to quiet the noise with more noise. But the answer has never changed. The way home has never moved. It waits, always waits in the quiet. So sit in the discomfort if it's there. Sit in the emptiness if that's what rises. Sit even when the mind screams that you should be doing something, especially then. Because the moment you stop running from yourself is the moment you begin to heal. Stillness is not passive. It is the most radical form of alignment. It is choosing to return when the world tells you to run. It is saying, I trust the silence more than the shouting. And in that trust, clarity emerges. Not as a lightning strike, but as a soft unfolding like petals opening to the sun, one breath at a time. Do you feel it? That gentle remembering that you don't have to strive to be worthy? That quiet hum beneath your rib cage that says you're not broken, just buried? That sacred pull inward that whispers, stop trying, just be? That's clarity rising. That's your soul stepping forward after years of waiting for you to pause, to listen, to come home. Because the soul cannot shout over the ego. It will never fight for your attention. It will simply wait. It will wait while you exhaust yourself with proving. It will wait while you perform for love. It will wait while you carry burdens that were never yours to carry. And when you finally put them down, when you sit in the stillness long enough to hear the silence, it will gently say, welcome back. There is no punishment for forgetting, only pain. The pain of being disconnected from your own light. But that pain too is a teacher. It is not here to destroy you. It is here to guide you not toward more doing, but toward deeper being. Every ache, every doubt, every unraveling moment is a breadcrumb leading you back to the stillness where clarity lives. And when you enter that space, something sacred happens. You stop asking life for explanations. You stop begging the universe to make it make sense. You begin instead to trust. Not because you have the answers, but because you no longer need them. You begin to feel the subtle but unshakable truth that you are guided, that you are carried, that you are enough. The world outside may still be loud, but the world within becomes your sanctuary. And from that sanctuary, everything changes. Not because life changes, but because you see it differently. You see it through the eyes of presence, through the lens of love, through the truth of your soul, which was never confused, only unheard. And so you walk differently. You speak with more softness. You listen with more depth. You move with more grace. Not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because you're no longer trying to be anything else. You are finally being what you are, a sacred thread in the fabric of existence, a note in the great song of creation, a soul remembering its light. Stillness teaches you that nothing is missing, that you don't need to chase alignment. You need only remove the noise that's hiding it. You don't need to create purpose. You need only feel the pulse of it that's always been within you. Let go of the idea that clarity is something to be earned. It is not a prize. It is a presence. It arises when you are brave enough to stop, open enough to listen, soft enough to feel. It flows in like a tide, not when you command it, but when you invite it. And it washes away everything that was never true. In the stillness, illusions dissolve, masks fall, armor melts. You become transparent to yourself. And in that transparency, there is nothing left to defend, nothing left to fix, nothing left to prove. There is only truth. And the truth is that you are already whole. You always have been. Stillness does not change your life by adding more to it. It changes your life by taking away what never belonged. The false urgency, the inherited fear, the borrowed dreams, the narratives handed to you by a world that confused motion for meaning. Stillness is the great purifier. It doesn't decorate the cage, it dissolves it. And what's left when the cage dissolves? Freedom. The kind of freedom that doesn't shout or need permission. The kind of freedom that doesn't come with flags or declarations. The kind of freedom that lives in your breath. Quiet, sacred, unmistakable. It's the freedom of no longer being pulled in 1,000 directions. The freedom of finally hearing your own voice again, after years of listening to everyone else's. The freedom of remembering that you are allowed to choose peace over performance. When you begin to live from stillness, you no longer crave validation in the same way. You no longer bend yourself into versions that fit the room. You no longer ask people to fill the void that only presence can hold. Because you've tasted something deeper. You've touched the well beneath the world's thirst. You've returned to the source, not in theory, but in living, breathing reality. And from that place, everything changes. You love without attachment. You speak without trying to impress. You listen without waiting to respond. You no longer react, you respond. Because you are no longer driven by unconscious stories. You are awake now, rooted, still. Clarity strips away the unnecessary. It reveals the essence. And when you see with essence, you don't just see more clearly, you see more kindly. You look at your pain with tenderness instead of judgment. You hold your past with compassion instead of shame. You see other people's anger as fear, their cruelty as confusion, their arrogance as woundedness. And you forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you do. Stillness births this kind of clarity.
Not the kind that just makes decisions easier, but the kind that makes the heart softer. The kind that lets you walk through the same world, but with entirely new eyes. Eyes that see through illusion, that recognize divine patterns in chaos, that find peace not in the absence of noise, but in the presence of awareness. There is a sacred intelligence moving through this universe. Call it God, call it source, call it life. It is not random, it is not cruel, it is precise, gentle, profoundly aware of what your soul came here to remember. But it doesn't force you, it invites you. It will not wrestle your will to the ground. It will wait, and it waits in the quiet. You want to know who you are? Then be still. Don't just sit with the question. Become the space that no longer needs to ask. That's what stillness does. It doesn't answer your questions, it dissolves them. It doesn't fix your brokenness, it reveals that you were never broken. It doesn't give you new ideas, it clears the fog so truth can rise. Like the sun rising not because it's told to, but because it's what it does. You are not here to be a performer on life's stage. You are not here to be constantly visible, constantly relevant, constantly productive. You are here to be real, to be awake, to be so rooted in truth that nothing outside you has the power to uproot you. And that kind of rootedness comes not from willpower, but from stillness. It's in stillness that you remember the rhythm of life, the inhale and exhale, the expansion and the return, the rise and the rest. You were never meant to run endlessly forward. You were designed to pause, to reflect, to listen, to let the tide carry you back inward before you reach again outward. The clarity that comes in stillness is not about making better plans. It's about no longer needing a plan to feel safe. It's about trusting the unfolding, about letting go of your white-knuckled grip on how you think it should go and leaning fully into the mystery. Because the mystery is not your enemy. It is the birthplace of grace. Do not fear the unknown. Fear missing it. Fear becoming so busy, so distracted, so addicted to noise that you never hear the invitation hiding beneath the surface of your life. The invitation to come home, not to a house, not to a person, not to a belief, but to the timeless space within you that has never been touched by fear. That place is still. That place is whole. That place is where clarity lives. And once you live from that space, the world no longer controls your peace. You no longer chase love, you become it. You no longer fear endings, you trust transitions. You no longer resist what is, you flow with it. And in that flow, everything sacred becomes visible again. The ordinary becomes holy. The mundane becomes miraculous. And so the invitation remains, be still. Not because it's trendy, not because it's spiritual, but because your soul remembers the language of silence, and it's time you did too. You won't find yourself in the next breakthrough, the next relationship, the next success. You will find yourself when you stop running. When you sit in the quiet with nothing to prove, nowhere to get, no one to become, and in that sitting, you will hear the oldest truth echo through your being. You are always it. You were always enough. You are always home. So now, as the breath slows and the noise begins to fade into the background once more, you find yourself standing not at the end, but at the return. The return to what was always real, always waiting, always whispering beneath the rush of the world. This is not a conclusion. This is the moment when all the seeking dissolves, and only the stillness remains, and in that stillness, everything becomes clear. You don't need to make life perfect. You don't need to fix every flaw or heal every ache before you are allowed to be at peace. You are allowed now. Not after the storm in it, not once clarity comes, but because clarity comes when you stop demanding it and begin allowing it. The stillness does not erase the journey. It blesses it. It gathers every shattered moment and folds it into a single quiet truth. Nothing was wasted. Every detour was a teacher. Every heartbreak was a mirror. Every silence you avoided was a door back to yourself. You ran, yes. You stumbled. You forgot. But the soul never left you. It simply waited. And now you are ready to listen again. And what does the soul say? It doesn't give you instructions. It doesn't hand you a map. It doesn't require that you understand. It only asks that you trust. Trust the pause. Trust the breath. Trust the invisible rhythm that life has been moving to all along, even when you couldn't hear the music. Let the stillness be your sanctuary now. Let it be your teacher, your guide, your anchor, not once in a while, but always. Let it meet you in the morning before your thoughts begin. Let it hold you at night when your fears return. Let it be the space you return to when the world demands your performance. And you remember, I am not a role. I am not an idea. I am not what others need me to be. I am presence itself. And presence does not perform. Clarity is not a light that flickers on and off depending on your worthiness. It is always shining. It is always speaking. It is we who turn away, we who drown it out. We who run, not because we are lost, but because we forgot we already belong. And now, beloved soul, you remember that silence is not empty, it is full. You remember that surrender is not weakness, it is power. You remember that the pause is not the absence of progress, it is the birth of purpose. You remember that nothing outside you needs to change for you to return home. Because home is not a place, it is a presence. And it lives in you. Right here. Right now. It always did. So walk on, not with certainty, but with clarity. Not with all the answers, but with the knowing that you are allowed to not know and still be deeply, beautifully whole. Speak less to convince. Listen more to understand. Create not to impress, but to express. Love, not for what it brings back to you, but for the miracle of what it brings out of you. You do not need to be louder, you need to be truer. You do not need to be seen more, you need to see more. You do not need more power, you need deeper peace. And all of it begins and ends in the stillness you were once afraid to sit in. Now you know better. Stillness is not where you lose yourself, it's where you find yourself again. Not the self the world taught you to perform, but the real self, the quiet self, the eternal self, the self that does not need to be explained, only remembered. And so let your next breath be not a rush toward answers, but a return to presence. Let your next moment be not another chase for clarity, but a sacred pause where clarity finds you. You are not here to waste time. You are here to touch eternity, and you do so every time you choose to be still. So be still now, not because the world told you to rest, but because your soul remembered it could. Let this be the moment you stop waiting to arrive and realize you already have. Let this be the end of searching and the beginning of being. Clarity has come, not because the world changed, but because you did. Because you stopped, because you listened, because you remembered who you are. And who you are is enough. Always was, always will be. And now you know it. Clarity comes in the stillness. And in that stillness, you are finally free.